Okay, time to talk about one of my favorite things in life, food. It's funny, food is necessary for life, it's a cornerstone of culture, and it's everywhere. But weirdly, most people don't understand the mechanics of food. We know that there are food groups, we know food has calories, we know it affects our bodies in different ways, but beyond that, it probably gets hazy. So let's break down the very basics of food. Understanding these nutrition basics helped me lose weight and keep it off successfully. First, all food is made up of micro and macronutrients. Micronutrients are vitamins and minerals. So, for example, carrots are high in vitamin A. That is a micronutrient. Macronutrients are protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Macronutrients are most prominently displayed on nutrition labels. Macronutrients are parts of food that contain calories, also known as energy. We hear about weight being the result of a calories in, calories out equation, but not all calories are created equal. Understanding macronutrients will unlock the secrets of eating right. So let's break down the macronutrients. First, we're going to cover fat. Dietary fat is not the same as body fat, which is also called adipose tissue. Dietary fat is necessary. It helps with hormone regulation, brain function, and is the main energy source for cells. Dietary fat is 9 calories per gram and is stored by the body as an energy source for later. Common food sources for dietary fat are butter, oils, cheeses, nuts, nut butters, avocado, cream, sour cream, coconut milk, and coconut. The next macronutrient we're going to cover are carbohydrates. Carbs are the primary energy source for the body. Carbs are converted into glucose in the body. This glucose is either used for energy immediately or stored by the body for later. Sugars, starches, and fiber are different types of carbs. Carbs are 4 calories per gram. Common food sources for carbs are wheat, rice, potatoes, oats, corn, flours, bread, pasta, cereal, baked goods, potatoes, beans, lentils, sugar, fruit, and vegetables. The last macronutrient is protein. Protein is used by the body to grow and repair muscle, tendons, cartilage, bones, and cells. It is extremely difficult for the body to convert protein into energy. Therefore, protein is rarely stored as extra energy in the body. The majority of Americans do not eat sufficient protein in their diets. Protein is 4 calories per gram and is the most important macronutrient for the overall health of the body. It is the only macronutrient that the body cannot produce on its own. So clearly with fat, although dietary fat is not the same as adipose tissue, body fat can be easily converted into dietary fat if the body needs it. The body can also produce its own glucose, which is what carbohydrates are used for energy to keep the body going. The body can draw glucose out of its own stores to use it for energy. The body cannot draw protein out of itself in order to create protein, in order to repair and grow the tissues of the body. Food sources of protein are primarily animal products: beef, pork, chicken, turkey, seafood, eggs, milk, yogurt, cottage cheese, protein powder, which can be taken from milk, or vegetable sources soy, tempeh, seitan, and this is not by any means an exhaustive list. So here are some lists, also not exhaustive, but some lists of foods that are primarily made up of each macronutrient. So the first group we'll go over is fat. In the fat group, we have butter, cream, olives, oils, nuts, nut butter, cheese, egg, avocado, and then processed meats. As you can see with the top group, butter, cream, olives, and oil, those foods are exclusively fat. They do not have any protein or any carbohydrates. If they do, they're very trace. So these types of foods are going to be fat sources, period. Below them, I have nuts and then their counterpart, nut butter and cheese. This cheese breakdown of the macronutrients is an average of all cheeses. Every cheese is going to be different. Some cheeses are fattier than others, but this is a kind of an average of the cheese breakdown. As you can see with this group, they are high in fat, while they do have other macronutrients such as protein and carbohydrates. They are primarily made up of fat. And this is important. We'll get into reading nutrition labels a little bit later. But there are many foods like nuts that are packaged and marketed as high protein foods. Any food that has a higher skew towards one of the macronutrients, that is what they are a high source for. So in the case of nuts, they do have protein. That is true. But they skew higher in fats. So they are actually a high fat food more than they are a high protein food. Now, there are two kind of exceptions to this, and they're kind of superfoods that happen to skew a little bit higher or be categorized as a fat food. That would be eggs and avocados. Eggs are a superfood. They are chock full of so many vitamins and minerals. The fat in the yolk is actually considered a healthy fat. The egg white is protein. The egg as a whole food, actually everything that it contains working together when eaten as a whole food is readily absorbed into the body and is a superfood all on its own. And it is slightly higher in protein than it is in fat, but eggs are usually characterized as a high fat food, so I included them in the fat category. The other food is avocado. Avocado is high in fat, as you can see. This is high in a vegetable fat as opposed to an animal fat like butter or cream. It is 22 grams of fat. It is another quote-unquote good fat that doesn't negatively impact the heart. But the other thing with avocados is they are chock full of fiber. So fat, because it's so high calorically in 9 calories per gram, it's satiating. So a food like an avocado, which is high in fat, but then also high in fiber, which is also satiating and also protects the body in other ways, which we'll go over later. Avocados are also a great food to eat because they have kind of this multi-punch of benefits. So it's nice to eat an avocado. And then in the last group, we have processed meats, which are mainly from beef and pork sources, salami, sausage, and bacon. These are also high in protein. You can see they're, at least within salami's case and bacon, they're equal ratios of protein to fat. But when fat is 9 calories a gram and protein is 4 calories a gram, this almost doubling of caloric intake kind of negates the protein intake because if you do the math on approximately 30 grams of fat at 9 calories a gram, that is 270 calories from fat, and then approximately 120 calories from protein, where you now have 4 ounces of salami being a very large caloric intake. Lots of that calorie intake is from fat, which your body, if it's in excess, will store it as body fat. So these are more sources of fat than they are of protein. The next group we have is protein. So the top group is what I would call, I guess, white proteins. So it's white meat, chicken breast, white fish, game meat, which is game animals are, because they're wild and they live in the wild and aren't very sedentary, are very low in fat. Tuna, protein powder, non-fat Greek yogurt, all of these are very high in protein. They have minimal to no fat on them. So if you were to compare chicken breast at 35 grams of protein to, for example, salami at 28 grams of protein but 28 grams of fat, your 4 ounces of chicken breast is going to be significantly lower in calories while giving you that protein boost than 4 ounces of salami are. So if you're trying to lose fat, or you're just trying to get healthier, you don't want your body to be storing this kind of excess energy into fat, something like chicken breast or game meat would be a better choice than salami, for example. Then the second group are products that have high protein content, but they do have fat just by the nature of what kind of cut of meat they are, for example. But the protein ratio is much higher than the fat ratio. So 92% lean ground beef, for example, is 21 grams of protein and 9 grams of fat. The steak is an average. There are many cuts of steak. Some steak cuts are not as fatty as others. So this is kind of an average of steak cuts. So you still get 24 grams of protein and 14 grams of fat. It is a significant in the fat department. I'm not going to lie, that does add calories, but the protein is high that it makes it worth it. And then I have 2% cottage cheese, which has 5 grams of fat and 25 grams of protein. There is non-fat cottage cheese as well, which would have 0 grams of fat. And then lastly, we have carbs. So the top group of carbohydrates is what I would call your kind of straight carbs. While they do offer some protein or some fat, it is primarily carbs. So if we look at 1 cup of wheat flour, for example, it does have 16 grams of protein, which is a fair amount of protein, but it has 84 grams of carbohydrates. So again, if we think about the body as ingesting calories as energy, and wanting to store any excess energy that we don't need in the moment, wheat flour is going to convert faster into stored energy because of the excess carbohydrates than, let's say, chicken breast would, for example. Below this group, we have oats, sweet potatoes, bananas, berries, beans, and lentils. So this group is special in a way because while they are high in carbohydrates, when eaten in their whole form, so in the case of oats, when eating a whole oat instead of instant oats, or when eating a whole banana or whole fruit as opposed to a jam or a ground up fruit in a smoothie, all of these foods contain a high amount of fiber. Now, fiber is in the carbohydrate family, but fiber is not easily digested by the body. Fiber is actually the material makeup of the food. It's what holds the food together. So when you eat a whole berry, let's say, for example, it goes through, your stomach breaks it down, and then you have this kind of fibrous plant matter that's left over that goes into your intestines, and then the bacteria that lives in your intestines starts to break that fibrous material down, which then creates it feeds that bacteria, which we want. It feeds the good bacteria. And then it creates kind of this mucus lining along the intestines that creates a barrier to absorption of some of the calories or the nutrients and the things like that. So what ends up happening, and this happens in the case of nuts, for example, as well, because nuts have fiber. So I'll use nuts as an example because they've studied almonds actually very extensively. In the case of nuts, you actually only ingest or absorb 70% of the total calories of nuts because the fibrous material in nuts blocks the absorption of that other 30%. And they believe that the other 30% of those calories or of those nutrients is actually eaten by the good gut bacteria. And we want to feed the good gut bacteria because that is a whole nother like kind of ball of wax and a ball of research that is just being opened up now. But the good bacteria does a lot for regulation for the health of the body, mental health, physical health, heart health, lung health, everything. So we want to feed the good bacteria, and fiber feeds the good bacteria. Beans and lentils also very high in fiber when they're eaten whole, also high in protein. They still skew much higher in the carbohydrate section, so you still will be getting kind of excess carbohydrates in relationship to the protein. But the fiber helps, and all around as a whole food, those are great foods. So in the next video, we'll talk a little bit more about reading nutrition labels, and we'll talk a little bit more about fiber and looking at how that affects or doesn't affect the body. Thank you.